Hello, good evening. 3 issues, 3 slightly different presenters. Welcome to 3D with James O'Brien standing in for a poorly Tessa Dunlop this week. Get well soon to you, Tessa. She'll be back soon, we hope. But for tonight...
And no sex, please. We're in public. The Lords react to the proposed Sexual Offences Bill. They want tougher action to outlaw sex in public toilets. The original bill made that OK if the door was closed.
Today, where it was met with derision by those who claim it fails to deal with sex in public, or more specifically, sex in public toilets. James O'Brien takes up the story.
Tory peers today tabled an amendment to the government's Sexual Offences Bill in the hope of making sex in public toilets illegal. But is this an anti-gay amendment, and is it really necessary to legislate against this sort of behaviour? I'm joined now by Baroness Noakes, who tabled the amendment in the Lords, and Clarke from the gay campaign group OutRage. Baroness Noakes, I know you've been at enormous pains to stress that this isn't an anti-gay amendment in any way, shape or form. It's passed now, and it's hard to think of another section of society who's in fact going to be affected by that if it were to become law.
Well, it's certainly true that most of the offences that are currently committed, mainly under the offence called gross indecency, involve men. But it is not true that it always involves men. And we thought it was very, very important to make sure that the offence was drafted in gender-neutral terms, because we agree with the government that the Sexual Offences Bill should be gender-neutral. That's why we agreed with the government initially that the offence of gross indecency, which was an anti-gay offence, should be repealed. But at the same time, they were going to replace it with an offence of sex in public. They then withdrew that, so we thought...
They had to withdraw that because lots of, naturists and people objected. You couldn't have had sex in your own garden, for instance, unoverlooked.
There were many problems with it. Sex in one's own garden, overlooked. Sex in the open country, which is very popular. It was a very broadly drafted clause, and I could see where the government ran into trouble. But then they didn't put anything in its place, and having tabled the removal of gross indecency, we felt they had to put something in its place, so we put the amendment, which happily was passed this afternoon, specifically on sex in a public lavatory. But I want to emphasise that it is intended to be gender neutral. It is intended not to attack the gay community as such.
Well, I mean, on paper, Clarke, it's gender neutral, I suppose, but I'm fairly certain that this isn't going to impinge very heavily on the heterosexual community.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's a major part of it. At the end of the day, we all know in reality that the people who have sex in public toilets tend to be gay men. You do not tend to get men and women having sex in public toilets. They, as Lady Noakes has just said, use the open air in the open country. They use lovers' lanes. It's idealised. It's romanticised. When gay men do it in public toilets, then people like Baroness Noakes get quite excited about this and want to have legislation specifically targeting these group of people. I'd like to ask Baroness Noakes why you haven't, in your legislation, in your amendment, talked about lovers' lanes, talked about the great open air, talked about places and parks where heterosexual
toilet specific
targeted gay men.
Let me answer that. Yeah. It's because public toilets arouse the most concern, because people want to use toilets for what they were designed for and built for, which is going to the lavatory. And many people get concerned when public lavatories are taken over.
Which people?
Sorry? Which
people get concerned? Many people get concerned.
Oh, yes. We've had a number of letters of people who are concerned. In particular, parents with children get very concerned about the children going in.
No, these mothers
with sons. Let me just remind you of mothers and sons who can't go in with their children, who have to stand outside. They are concerned about possibly encountering a sexual encounter within a public lavatory. And we think that's a big problem.
Is it a reasonable fear, though? I mean, is there a possibility that wandering into a public lavatory, a young mother with her child, young father even, with it being the gent, is likely to encounter a couple of gay men?
Let's be realistic. The kinds of places where this happens are specific places where people know about, where people turn a blind eye to it. There are places in London...
Yes, but presumably the people writing letters to Lady Noakes don't know which public conveniences are likely to be used for cottaging.
Well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the public conveniences in the middle of Selfridges or in the middle of BHS?
We're talking about every single one in the country.
We could be any public lavatory.
Well,
that is the point.
This is this thing about Lady Noakes' argument. This is the point of this legislation, to whip up this kind of fear, like every public toilet in the country is going to be used by gay men, they're going to be engaging in sexual acts. Think of the children, what are they going to be doing, wandering in, having to see this. My position on this is quite clear. If people are engaging in sexual activity and they are causing offence to other people deliberately and they're being thoughtless in a public place, then yes, there are grounds for prosecution. However, it's not, we're not talking about that. We're talking about people using public toilets in areas where people know that it goes on. And I'd like to ask again, why on earth are you simply obsessed with public toilets? Well, if this is legislation that's meant to talk about sexual activity all over the place, in the outside, in the great outdoors, as you just said yourself with a smile, what about parents with their children stumbling in on that? Why are you talking about public toilets? Why are you simply targeting gay men?
Let me just come back. You said, in effect, that some public toilets could be taken over by gay groups and appropriated for their own use. I don't accept that can be done. I think all public toilets were built for the public to use as toilets.
Why are you simply talking about public toilets?
Well, I'll come on to that in a minute. I just wanted to finalise the point on public toilets, that I believe that no public toilet should be taken over by any group for any purpose other than for use as a toilet. But let me come on to
the allegation of lavatorial fixation.
Yes, exactly. Let's come on to whether or not we should have widened that offence to cover sex in parks, other places where there have been some no-go areas created by both homosexual and heterosexual activity. The reason is that we had to focus our resources on the thing that we thought we could draft. The government got into trouble when they tried to draft their sex in public offence in clause 74 of the first bill, and that's why they withdrew it. We had to say, have we got the resources to do all of this drafting properly? No, we didn't. We did know how to do public lavatories because it's a subject you can put your arms around, so to speak. Wait a minute. But we have always been open to the possibility that the government or any other group could produce drafting that was robust, and that is to say it directed at the right things and not at the wrong things, for other kinds of sexual activity in public. But we just felt very concerned that public lavatories was a known area of problem.
Alan, the bottom line is proving to the undecided, if you like, that there is in fact a necessity for cottages in the gay community. And you're a relatively young man. You've grown up in quite a liberal society. I don't know whether this is something you go in for yourself, but I would presume that you don't need to, because you're out, you're proud, society has moved on. Why do we still need these sort of, well, fairly sordid little toilets being populated, as you've said yourself, specific areas being well known for this sort of activity? Why is it still necessary?
At the end of the day, an awful lot of people who cottage, it is true, are married men, are people who are not comfortable with their sexuality, not able to come out to themselves or to other people for whatever reason. However, I would also defend people's right to have sex outside, as long as it's not causing offence to other people, as long as it's not in front of people who would cause offence. If they're doing it in areas where other people are not going and not wandering around, i.e. parks and heaths at very, very late at night, where people are not going to be seeing it, that's absolutely fine. Again, it is hypocritical. You have straight people doing it, and it's called lovers' lanes. Just
come back, if you would, to this idea that it's still necessary. So what your argument would be that it's a generation of men, if you like, who...
It's not simply a generation of men. Younger men do it as well. I'm not saying...
Why do they do it?
Why do people have sex outside? Why do straight people have sex outside? Why do people have sex?
Sex outside is quite different from sex in a public lavatory. I think there is a difference, which is why we didn't tackle it.
Why is it different?
One of the points made by Lord Ali.
It's a better view.
Lord Ali talked about it in the House of Lords this afternoon.
Why is it different? Tell me. Why is it different in a public lavatory to outside?
Lord Ali is a Labour peer who is openly gay.
I think that merits an explanation, actually.
He said that it was a generational issue and that the younger men have access to clubs, etc., and it's something that should die out. But I do not believe 1 minute supports the possibility that sex takes place in a public lavatory. The difference is that people use public lavatories for the purpose for which they were built.
Well, so we use the countryside for the purpose for which it was built, which is wandering around.
There are far fewer instances of problem areas. There are one or two areas.
Why do you think that is? Do you think that maybe because it's more straight people have sex in parks in the daytime?
No, I don't. I think there's just less of a problem.
Is that less of a problem for you?
I think if it causes a public nuisance, there should be a way of dealing with it. There's the common law offence of outraging public decency, which
didn't
remains.
include in your amendment to cover sex outside in places other than public toilets. Again, the amendment was all about public toilets. It was all about public lavatories. I do not understand why you were targeting simply this group of
Alan, we've had an answer to that question. I'm sorry, we have had a decent answer to that question, and the answer was very simply, I may well have wanted to target other areas, but we just bit off as much as we could chew. That passes. That's a valid answer. Okay. What exactly is it that your problem is with the outlawing of anybody having sex in a public toilet?
We need a grown-up attitude to sex. We need an environment where sex is not seen as dirty, where sex is not seen as sordid, where it's accepted that people have sex. People do have sex outside. People always will have sex outside. People always have done. The problem with your legislation, when you say that it's not anti-gay, I mean, your party is responsible for some of the most pernicious anti-gay legislation in this country. Legislation such as Section 28. If we didn't have Section 28, if we had legislation that encouraged people to feel good about themselves, to accept themselves, from the moment sex education is taught in schools, right up until they're an adult, for a start, I don't think you would have as many people cottaging in public toilets. However, that still doesn't change my view that it's something that does go on that we should accept, and we shouldn't see
And war on motorists. Transport Secretary Alistair